Hey everyone, welcome to the 351st episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have just a lot to talk about today. It felt pretty sparse, but then we managed to scrounge up some futuristic topics. So we'll be talking about the smart home and the metaverse, or maybe just UWB bringing the metaverse into the smart home. We have an excellent package from The Verge about Matter, so we'll do a little update there, plus a new chip launched for Matter. Samsara priced its initial public offering. We'll talk about that. Plus, we've got, I'm going to go with bad subscription practices. We're also going to be getting an update on the Senate Helium LoRaWAN network. And Inmarsat is signing more deals for its satellite connectivity option. We're also going to do an interview with the CEO of Fi, the maker of a smart dog collar. So that's Jonathan Besseman. And he is going to be talking about both pricing subscription plans and building a business model around subscriptions, as well as figuring out the right connectivity options. So a lot of fun coming for you. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, Twilio. And as a programming note, for the first time since April 1st, 2015, we're going to take a week off.
Ooh.
It's very exciting. So next week, on Thursday, there will be no Internet of Things podcast for you. It's been a rough 2 years. Normally we do like a Q&A and we pre-record with my family. It just felt like a lot. So we won't be joining you next week, but
I'm going to Cabo.
You're going to Cabo? Nice. I wish. We'll be back on December 30th. So don't worry. We'll be talking about what we expect to see at CES and then follow that up with CES. So all of that will happen. Just small break. Okay. Let's get the show started with a message from one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor, we welcome back Silicon Labs. And Silicon Labs invites you to the open house of their new 3D smart home experience. You can take a self-guided virtual tour to explore cutting-edge smart home technology, review the unique benefits of each wireless protocol, and learn how to connect to various ecosystems. As you tour the house, you'll learn about the wireless solutions connecting each device, read real-world case studies, and gain access to resources to jumpstart your smart home device development. So welcome to the 3D Smart Home Experience at solutions.scilabs.com/homes. It's also going to be available on the website, the link to that, because that was kind of long. And tour that with us. Yay! Okay, Kevin, speaking of the future, we've got two kind of related stories here. One is about what the metaverse means for smart homes, and then the other is based off a video we saw about ultra-wideband and how that might change the smart home. And to be clear, both Kevin and I have been talking about ultra-wideband in the smart home for years because we've been very excited about like proximity and better mapping. So Kevin, do you want to kick us off with what you think ultra-wideband is going to bring for the smart home?
Oh, yes, I do. Because for me personally, this is probably the most exciting thing I've seen this year. And that says a lot because even though we've had the pandemic for the second year now, we've still had some interesting developments in the smart home. But this is awesome. So what this is a prototype application. It's called Point, as in point and click. That's the whole idea. And it's a way to control everything in your smart home. So you're like, well, we already have smart home control apps. What's the big deal here? The big deal is that this implements a UWB solution using Apple's U1 chip that's in its most recent iPhones for the last at least 2 years. It's also in Apple Watches. It's in Apple AirTags. And it reminds me a bit of the fun part of having Apple AirTags, because you get this little AR experience with an AirTag as you're looking for it, because the UWB chip is so precise that the phone starts pointing and giving you exact distance from the tag. take that approach and apply it to all the gadgets in your smart home. This is a prototype application, as I mentioned. It's from an iOS developer named Bastian Andalewski, and he has shared a video of it, and he said basically this is the smart home controller app that we could have.
And it looks kind of like a remote control in some ways, right? You like point at the thing and you're like, click off.
Yeah, exactly. He's basically said that we're all familiar with TV remotes. You just point the remote to the TV and you press a button to turn it on, turn it off, change the volume, etc. Granted, remotes have gotten far more complicated, but the concept is simple. What his app does is let me start that again.
Sure.
So the way he has implemented this is a bit of a workaround because most smart home devices, in fact, I can't think of any really that have a UWB chip inside. There are a few, such as some of the Apple HomePod speakers, for example, have a UWB processor or chip inside, but your smart bulbs don't, your thermostats don't, most devices that you interact with do not. So to mitigate this, he has set up little locational areas where his devices are to kind of act as though the device has something like a UWB chip in it. Now that he's got it set up that way, he walks around his house, and just like with the Apple AirTags finder, he sees dots as he points his phone around the house. The dot represents, hey, I found a device here. His app intelligently knows what device he's put there, and then it surfaces only the controls for that device. So you know the capabilities, and you can control all of them. So in the video, he shows just walking up to a regular table lamp. He's got an on-off and a dimmer. He shows a colored bulb. He gets on-off, dimmer, and a color palette. You can do it with a thermostat, he says. You could do it with a speaker or whatever. So it's intuitive, it's intelligent, and it automatically shows you the controls for the specific device you're pointing at.
And that is awesome. Although I don't know if it's tied to a wearable, that makes a ton of sense. If it's tied to my smartphone, I'm not interested. I don't carry my smartphone around.
No, and for you, voice is probably the bigger used interface.
Or buttons. I do like buttons. Although you could use something. Could you use something like create a little button or a clicker kind of in the room for something like this?
I suppose it's possible. I mean, it would still just tied to whatever the button can see in the room, so to speak. If it had UWB, or as I actually mentioned this in an article, it doesn't have to be UWB. I suppose it could be Bluetooth. You could implement this with Bluetooth or some other RF technology, but I like the promise of UWB because of the exact precision, or better precision, I guess, than most other solutions.
Yes. And that, especially when you're like, if you have a lamp near another lamp or a lamp near another device, like,
you want the precision. You want to know the left dot is the left lamp and the right dot is the right lamp, and so on. I even think that this could be used in the sense of presence detection, because my Apple Watch does have UWB. So if you could turn it into tracking me, that could kick off routines and scenes specific to me in a particular room or a particular device. He does not talk about that, but that's kind of where I went next in my mind.
That's kind of where, like, being able to map very closely every single device with UWB in it in a home, and then the people moving around within that home, then it becomes really fun to be like, hey, turn on the lights, and the lights in the room you're in come on, right? Because your voice is associated.
And to the way that you want them turned on versus somebody else.
Yes. Although we could fight it out, like if we're both in the same room, turn on the lights. No, turn on the lights.
I have root access.
Okay. And this ties into a story that we saw about what does the metaverse mean for the smart home? And at first, I'm going to be honest, I was like, oh, balderdash, right? Let's not even care about this. But figured I'd read it because you never know. And basically, the idea here is just mapping, and then it gets a little silly with things like, hey, you could have, right now I might have a voice call or a duo call or a FaceTime call, using a connected device in my home with like my parents or something. But now I could do that with silly filters kind of over my face where I could be my avatar. That is less compelling to me than some of the other use cases. Some of the things that might be kind of fun is the idea to adjust your home or even program your home your real world home in the metaverse where it's a little bit easier to orient. And then you could do things like set up your preferences. Like, I want my home to look like this. And you could have the interfaces happen there where you can have more, I guess, complex information easily. And then you could set that to actually run in the real world.
It's also easier to test things there. It basically becomes a digital twin of your home.
Yes. And I don't know, anything else from that kind of intrigued you?
Well, they actually discuss mapping, which kind of gets back to the topic we were just talking about, which I think is very important and really almost a blight in the smart home right now. It's been a challenge for years and hasn't been cracked yet, at least not mainstream. Yeah, I mean, there's some potential opportunity there with, and I know you're not a huge fan of like VR goggles, but AR could bring new experiences to the smart home. I guess what I got out of it is they're like, the metaverse sort of already is here. It's just, the smart home is the first step towards that type of environment. Maybe a primitive step, but it's sort of here today.
Yeah, and I see that with the creation of digital twins for like office buildings and campuses. We already have that sort of thing. And this is when I think about things like AR and even VR, I think about the way that we have so much more information available to us from sensors, and being able to overlay that on the real world becomes really interesting. So things like being able to walk into an office building and understand or see an overlay to get you to a empty conference room would be an example. Or when you walk into my home, if you check your VR glasses, you can see the guest code for the Wi-Fi, right? Just things that right now are a little bit more complicated to access on a phone. You could just, see them, or you might be like, it's cold in here. And then the interface for your thermostat pops up in front of you and you can gesture to change it, for example. So, okay, that's just us thinking about things. It still feels super early. And let's talk about something that is also futuristic, but is maybe not as futuristic, because we should hopefully see it by the middle of next year. And that is Matter. And I am really impressed. And I'm a pretty cranky individual, right? And The Verge did an overview on the Matter smart home interoperability standard, and they did it right. They did this epic story, they did a podcast, and they did an FAQ. And as someone who's been following this standard since it was launched in December 2019, and who's like, every time we talk to these people, the Matter folks, the Connectivity Standards Alliance that is promoting the standard, we write a full 900 words on what it means. I'm talking to developers all the time. So this story was excellent. People who read the site and who listen to the podcast may not get a lot that's new here. The bottom line The Verge found out is that, hey, we still expect it to be around by the middle of next year. Yes, it's late. And no, we don't know exactly how it will work, but everyone's really hoping it will make things a little bit easier. But it's probably not going to do exactly what you want it to do as a consumer. So that is the entire article summed up. Little bits of information that I thought were worth pointing out. They got Tony Fadell, who is the founder of Nest and the creator of the Thread protocol. They got him, and he's very excited to see Thread actually come to fruition in the smart home. Even Fadell acknowledges that Thread is just one piece of a building block to get to a better and more resilient smart home. But yay, they do a good job of explaining Thread in the story. Also, yay. And I don't know, what else do we...
It's a great summary. I read it and I was looking for anything that I personally didn't know. And I can't say I found anything because we have been covering it. We have been talking to people and writing about this. But that's okay, because the people who read The Verge are not likely the people that listen to this show. And anything that broadens the message of what's coming down the pike, why it matters, how it's going to make your life easier, I think that's a great thing. And I completely agree. This was really, really well done.
Yes. And we have seen some really bad ones. So that's why we're so excited. Also, related to Matter, news. Infineon now has a Matter ready chip because Matter does not exist yet. There is no certification yet, but it's Matter ready. It'll support Bluetooth for onboarding and Thread. And this is going to be just an SoC, so radio and brains for smart home devices. And
yeah, not much in the brains department. Enough, but not much. Like 96 megahertz ARM microcontroller.
Yeah, this is a microcontroller. This is, and the Thread devices are sensors, so they're not going to be super. This is Thread only. So the point is that we're seeing silicon that is ready for devices that you can just automatically update. And that's great because you don't build a chip if you don't think the market's going to be there. Yay, Matter! And just so y'all know, I'm going to CES. I will be asking about Matter. I'll be looking for Matter-ready devices. We'll probably see some things and some announcements there, and that will be exciting.
Real quick, I don't want to forget this little bit. I'm not entirely surprised by this new microcontroller because it was only 4 or 5 weeks ago that Infineon joined the Connectivity Standards Alliance board of directors.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
We figured. All right. Moving over to the industrial or enterprise IoT, Samsara, which is, they're one of the older companies trying to build a horizontal enterprise IoT platform. They had filed to go public last month, and on Wednesday, December 15th, they priced their initial public offering at $23 per share, which is on the high end. So we're recording this Wednesday morning. So far the price is up. I don't know where it'll end today, but this is a big deal because we've had some pretty soft IPOs in the IoT space, and Samsara is very strong. This is a good deal. Samsara provides a platform for IoT devices. It includes the sensors. Their biggest product is probably their telematics product. It's a fleet tracking and telematics information product. They also do like cold chain tracking, and they came out of the enterprise computing world and specifically enterprise networking. They built the Meraki Wi-Fi routers, corporate Wi-Fi routers way back in the day. And with Samsara, what they did, they came out and they were like, the IoT needs some sort of scalable platform that works across everything. Very enterprisey kind of notion. That didn't sell. People were like, oh, it's still too complicated. So then they broke it out into very specific verticals, and that sold. And what's happening now is as the industry matures, they're breaking down the walls between those different verticals. And now what you have is you can get data from any part of any sort of sensor and bring it into the Samsara platform and see what you need to see. It kind of depends on your goals there, which is why this is so complicated. Anyway, I'm very excited that this did well. I'm excited to have a company trading under the IoT ticker. And yeah, congratulations, Samsara.
How'd they get that one?
They asked for it.
I'm just surprised nobody else had it.
Yeah, me too. This is bad news. Is it bad news? It's disheartening. So over at Ars Technica, they wrote a story about Toyota owners realizing they have to pay $8 a month to keep using their key fob for remote start. And this was frustrating for users because they had been using this for like roughly 3 years. And all of a sudden they were like, oh, now you've got to pay for it. And it's probably more frustrating because it doesn't require like any additional hardware. You're not using it based on a subscription to like cellular or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just direct radio communications from the fob to the car.
Yeah, which you would use to unlock the door, which is still a free service. It's just the remote start is going to cost you $8 a month. And
yeah, it's frustrating because it really wasn't made clear to people when they bought these Toyotas. This is like 2018 and prior. And it's interesting because in 2019, we got a Toyota RAV4 and we were offered this service. And my wife actually wanted it, but I'm like, $8 a month just to start your car. And we didn't get it. So we're not affected because we never had it. But apparently a lot of people had free trials to it, 3-year trials, and it's now being
It just stops working. You're going to go click it. And if you're not paying, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things. Like if it is truly buried in the fine print, that's not cool. That's a bait and switch. And I do think that's something like the FTC should investigate, the Federal Trade Commission, because it feels like a deceptive kind of ad practice or a deceptive business practice. But if it was advertised and people just took it, it kind of opens up a lot of interesting questions. One is, how do we feel about companies charging for services based solely on the value and not based on the underlying cost? We've done that historically forever in software, but when you have a physical element to it, people tend to price it based less on value and more on like the cost of the item or the perception of the cost of the item. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic going forward for any kind of connected device that people are trying to sell. And two, what happens when you sell your car, you lease your car, and, maybe the person has access to this service, but they don't realize that it's going to turn off one day, like in a resale situation. And that seems unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, and our lease is up in a few months on that vehicle, although we're probably going to just outright buy it just because the buyout is so low compared to buying a used car right now.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like if it is a bait and switch, then Toyota, will throw it in the evil category. If not, I think it's a really interesting question to ask, like what we see of as a service and how we price them. And actually, our guest this week is going to talk a little bit about pricing services. And so hopefully that'll be interesting to y'all.
I'm curious, since you have a Tesla, have you added any of their services like the remote driving capability and others? Because the prices change based on when you purchase that. The functionality changes because some of it's still in flux.
I didn't have the option. So when I bought my Tesla is a 2014? I think it's a 2013. So we didn't buy the sensor upgrade. Well, we bought a used Tesla. We didn't find one with like the sensor upgrade package. So if we wanted to get some of the more autonomous driving features, we would have had to spend like $5,000 adding like stuff to the car. And it just didn't feel worth it at the time, simply because I wasn't confident that it would be worth the money. Like self-driving, I know at the time they were like, yeah, it'll be 5 years. And I was like, I don't think so. I felt uncertain spending $5,000 on something that I didn't see. I couldn't see yet, right? It felt like a promise, not a reality. And I'm glad I made that decision. And, I think some things like when we bought the car, we didn't have to pay extra for charging. We didn't have to pay extra for internet connectivity. Like I know later iterations of the car, you do have to pay for charging after a certain number of years and for 4G connectivity for like things like it's like maps. And I would be okay with that. I don't love paying a subscription for basic functionality of a car, if that makes sense. But
no, I'm with you. I'm completely with you on that.
I really hate paying subscriptions for a lot of software features. I'll just be honest. If it's hardware that I'm buying, I want to own it. I want to repair it. I want to have, control over it in a way that I don't for software. And it's a really hard transition. And I write about this a lot because I think we're in the middle of trying to figure this all out. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, let's say
I'm the same way as you for the most part. I'm part of that old school model where, I bought a car and I'm paying for whatever I want up front, then I should just have that. I paid for it. And if there's an additional charge, then why was it not put in your business model to offer me that service, right? As part of the price of the car, the cost. So, I have a used EV as well. I have a 2018 Nissan Leaf, and I do have remote features that I can use from my smartphone to check the battery rate, or I can, turn the climate control on and so on. It does not cost me anything. I would be upset if I had to start paying because I'm used to having it. That's another aspect of this particular instance. These people were used to having that. So, I understand connectivity costs money. And if you're building into cars, I think you need to plan ahead for actually using that connectivity. People are going to use it and they want to use it. So are you going to charge them? Or are you going to be upfront about it? What are you going to do?
I don't know. Okay. Yeah. It's tough as a consumer and as a business.
Yep.
Again, we'll talk about that with our guest. Okay. Senate, which is a LoRaWAN network provider. Earlier this year, it teamed up with Helium, which is another LoRaWAN network provider that we talk about a lot because they've got a very interesting decentralized business model. They teamed up and they can roam onto each other's hotspots. So Senate has released their coverage map. We'll link to it in the show notes. And I was actually just kind of surprised looking at, once again, I realized, oh my gosh, the United States is huge and we have all these rural areas with very little coverage, basically, is what I realized. And the coverage map really it brings that home. So if you're using LoRaWAN for like asset tracking, like continual asset tracking across the major freeways in the middle of the country, it's not going to work.
I would also recommend people zoom in on that map because if you look at it as a whole, you walk away with the same impression that Stacy just explained, because I had the same one. But once we zoomed in, we could see more breadth of coverage. I mean, yes, it's concentrated, but it doesn't look nearly as bad as just a few dots on the U.S. map.
Yes, it really is. You're like, oh, no one, this just doesn't exist.
I see 14 hotspots in the country.
Yeah.
No, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad. But even, I mean, again, I'm going to say like for certain use cases, or if you live in the middle of nowhere, LoRaWAN is not going to necessarily do great.
If you live in the Midwest, I would get yourself a hotspot because that's prime real estate right now.
There you go. If you're if you live alongside a highway in the middle of the country, you just buy one. Okay. And other connectivity news. RBC Signals is working with Inmarsat to provide basically internet backhaul they're going to be the ground stations for Inmarsat's satellite IoT network, their ELERA satellite network. And RBC Signals, they do satellite ground stations, which is basically places where the satellites beam a signal and then they transfer it to the public internet where then it goes wherever it needs to go. They can also do it uplink. I would say imagine Contact, the movie, but they're not like that anymore. So
I love that movie.
Yeah, most people do. And I used to.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I've seen Contact.
Okay.
Good Lord.
Just making sure.
Oh, Kevin, you'll never forgive me for not watching The Lord of the Rings.
You shall not pass. You don't even know what that means.
I don't know.
Oh,
it's terrible. Why are we even doing this show? Y'all, if we don't come back next year, it's because Kevin has decided that I'm just not worth it. Not worth it after not watching The Lord of the Rings.
Can't be friends with somebody who hasn't seen Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I've read the books. All right. On that note, that concludes this segment of the show, but let us go to the Internet of Things podcast hotline, which is sponsored by Very. Very is a fully distributed IoT engineering firm that partners with its clients to build systems for smart manufacturing, smart energy and utilities, consumer electronics, and connected wellness. You can discover what Very's multidisciplinary teams can do for you at verypossible.com/services. And this month, December, if you call us at 512-623-7424, you will be entered to win a Lutron Cassetta bridge and an outdoor outlet, which I have used. Well, I tested. It's a review outlet, but I tested it with pretty string lights and they were lovely. It works. So give us a call. You'll be entered to win all through this month, and we might even answer your question on the show. And this week's question comes to us from Ken. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacy and Kevin. This is Ken from Ohio, working on a project, and I would love your perspective. We're currently working on some LED strip lighting for some cabinet lighting and looking for a 4-channel, like a red, green, blue, white type zone controller. Heard about the Shelly products, and their RGBW2 had caught my eye. I'm wondering what you thought of that as sort of an economical solution or something else that maybe I'm not aware of. To follow up on that, voice control, obviously Amazon or Google are two that I'm aware of. We do have one Echo, but would consider getting a little bit more to help with voice control, especially when it comes to lighting. I think that would be a very useful feature that I think we take advantage of. I'm wondering if you have a direction between Amazon and Google. I did see Kevin's article how you've currently got a mishmash, but, since I'm looking to scale up, wondered if there was maybe one way to lean versus the other. We are Amazon Prime customers, but I also use a lot of Google services, email, calendar, pictures, etc. So not much with the Google Assistant currently, but wondering if that might be a way I'd be interested in leaning. Finally, just to knit this all together, considering Home Assistant, haven't done much programming since the days of X10 with scripting and doing some kind of sequencing, so a little outdated and would like to get a little more current there. Have an assortment of hardware, got some Wise cameras, plugs, outlets, have some Amazon plugs, have some Reolink PoE security cameras, and would really like to try and start stitching this together as much as possible. Home Assistant thing looks like something that I'd be interested in learning about and using there, possibly adding a screen too for some local control in addition to the voice assistant. So I guess it all started with an LED question, which led into a little bit of voice control and possibly some Home Assistant. Would love if you had a perspective you could share with me, and be an early Christmas present to hear your thoughts. So I love the show and would love to hear from you guys. Hope to hear from you, and Merry Christmas. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Ken, we are so qualified to answer this question. I like the Shelly products. I have a couple of the modules. They work really well, and I encourage you to use that. And they will also work with an array of digital assistants and Home Assistant. So I think that's a good choice. Shelly's gear is very reliable, and I don't know what else to say about your LED lighting other than if you have the confidence to wire those modules in, which is really the only sticking point, it's more of a DIY instead of a plug and play option, do it.
It's easy though. I mean, it's basically just the wires get connected to the Shelly controller.
Yeah, turn off your power and just do it.
Yeah, that's optional in my house, but yeah.
Don't wire hot, Ken. Don't do it.
You're not an electrician until you've been shocked. But, as you said, it works with all the three major digital assistants. So you've got coverage from Google, Amazon, and Apple. So you can pick and choose at any point in the future. If you make a change, that's good. And I did double check on the Home Assistant integration, and that the Shellys are all integrated in that product as well as several other products. And I wanted to mention Home Assistant because you had mentioned you had dabbled and programmed and worked with or wrangled X10 back in the day. I think you would actually love Home Assistant. It's a far more modern approach, similar approach, but far more modern. And you can just download it for free. So you can put it on a Raspberry Pi, which is my preferred solution. If you can't find one right now, or you don't want to buy one right now, you can install this on Linux, Mac, Windows, and just test it out. And again, you've got your Shelly integrations as well as a gazillion other integrations for all the platforms. So I think you would really enjoy this.
Yeah. So Ken, just do it. Just do it. It's going to be great. And if you would like us to answer your question or just validate your initial thoughts, give us a call at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win that Lutron Cassetta bridge and outdoor outlet. And remember, you won't hear from us next week, but we will be back on December 30th with another episode of the Internet of Things podcast. And now, stay tuned for our guest. This week's guest is Jonathan Bensimon, who is the CEO of Fi. We're going to be talking about the Fi connected dog collar, building subscription plans that work, and connectivity. Yay! But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Twilio. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. And our sponsor this week is Twilio. So if you've been listening to us over the last few weeks, you already know about Twilio IoT and its Super SIM platform. But there's more. Twilio is now moving deeper into the IoT stack, and I have with me Jonathan Williams from the product management team at Twilio IoT to tell us more. So how's it going, Jonathan?
Hi, Stacey. Great to speak with you again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Twilio doesn't just offer IoT connectivity. You do have a new platform for device makers, yes?
That's right. Yes. So through the acquisition of Electric Imp, which is coming up for 2 years ago now, Twilio IoT also has products in the device builder space, most recently with our new Twilio Microvisor offering.
Yeah, Microvisor. So I covered the launch back in late 2020. What is it and why is it different?
Well, that's a great question. So microvisor, I like to think, is a whole new approach to IoT devices that really turns the idea of a device builder platform on its head. So gone are the old days where to use an IoT device builder platform, you kind of had to conform to the restrictive, specific ways of the platform approach. Here, we offer a hypervisor for microcontrollers, which means that you as the embedded software developer get complete control over your on-chip code, the language, and the development environment, while benefiting from a lifetime of security and connectivity management. So you get to focus entirely on your code and application. And the Twilio microvisor takes care of all of the tricky connectivity and security components that your device needs.
That's all very essential. So what kind of customers would Twilio microvisor work for?
In terms of customers today, we have a wide range of customers already accessing the microvisor on the private beta. And I think when it comes to the use case and application, then obviously customers looking for security in their IoT devices and the longevity of solutions. So one thing that we do is we provide a lifetime of security upgrades to your device. So this really suits enterprise customers with industrial applications.
That sounds great. So can our listeners easily give Twilio microvisor a try?
Indeed, they can. We are currently in private beta and are accepting applications for our beta program. Head over to Twilio/microvisor. That's twil.io, as in Twilio, /microvisor. There, you can sign up to get access to the documentation, the hardware, and access to the microvisor itself for evaluation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Jonathan Bensamoun, who is the co-founder and CEO of Fi. Hello, Jonathan. How are you today?
Hey, Stacey. Thanks for having me. I'm great.
All right. So at Fi, you make a connected dog collar. Can you tell me a little bit about why you developed this product?
Yeah, I mean, like the main driver for the start of this business was my dog Thor. I got him 5 years ago, and the main thing I observed about the space was like there was really no technology, and all the brands in the space were very dusty. They were old. There was not a ton of innovation, and I kind of stumbled on the use case of like the lost dog and tracking dog type of scenario when I hired a dog walker and who started taking shorter and shorter walks, and it kind of get me anxious. And I was like, okay, I really would like to be able to see where they are going when they're outside. And I kind of like stumbled on that use case where I had like tens of thousands of people online screaming about existing products, because this category existed for a while. And, you know, it's kind of an evolution of the hunting dog collars that is getting into the consumer space, and technology wasn't really ready yet to build something amazing for the consumer. And that's kind of like what we identified with my co-founder, Laura. And we saw there were a bunch of innovations coming to the space that were actually allowing us to build the first consumer product that allowed people to track their dog anytime, anywhere, kind of.
Yeah. And what are some of those innovations? Because when I think back, I feel like we've tried like the Whistle Pet, which is not a tracker. It is much more of an activity tracker, like a Fitbit for dogs. So what are some of the technological innovations that needed to happen to make a battery-powered dog collar possible, tracking dog collar?
Yes.
Possible?
So I think, you know, the first compromise you have to do when you're looking at any type of wearable device is like functionality versus battery size and overall form factor of the device, right? Like, so if you want to build something that tracks a dog and that is able to reliably use cellular and GPS technologies to do that, you're going to need a pretty big battery. So if you want to build something that is the size of like a washing machine on a dog, that's not going to be very challenging. But as soon as you're trying to broadly penetrate the consumer segment, you have to build something that's small enough that it feels comfortable for the dog and that people adopt, you know, in a reasonably easy way. And so to do that, you have to become really good at using power management on these devices. So the innovations that we saw coming to that space were multiple. I think on one side, you had battery manufacturing and energy density in general that was getting better and better. You had things like real BLE connectivity that could hold long connections and like in very, very low power state that were getting like more and more efficient. Even Wi-Fi kind of connectivity and communication was getting more power efficient. And finally, I think the best changes in that technology stack were really GPS and cellular communication, right? GPS, you had a lot of innovation that came to market with like ephemeral satellite positioning kind of data to acquire fixes faster, and modules getting more efficient at like acquiring fixes as well. And then on the cellular side, you had all the like narrow band, low bandwidth networks that emerged, Cat M1 being the one that we're using. And when we started the business, it was really kind of like maturing at AT&T and Verizon. They were kind of like just starting to roll out the Cat M1 network on their towers. So that was definitely making a huge difference in the power budget around this type of devices.
Let's talk about connectivity options, because now we're a little further in. There's things like NB-IoT out, and I don't know actually how much data your caller needs. So we should probably start with what's the bare minimum a caller needs to give its location.
Yeah, I think it's kind of difficult to give a real number here, because obviously everything varies depending on what is happening to the caller, right? But like if you're looking just at the use case that is kind of like asset tracking in outdoor areas, we're talking about sending coordinates back to a server, right? So like drastically, we're not streaming video, or we're not doing anything that requires very high bandwidth. So I think in like the type of like power profile and type of like battery size and payload that you're dealing with, we're pretty much on the low end on the payload side and on the bandwidth requirements. And I think depending on what your requirements are, like then you're going to pick one technology or another. But like there are other factors like, how broad this technology is adopted and things like that.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, because I feel like we're entering into this golden era of low power, wide area networks that, can travel over long ranges. And I'm thinking of things like we now have LoRa is becoming much more viable thanks to two factors. I would say Amazon's Sidewalk network, which I know we still don't know how real it is and how far it extends. And we also have things like Helium and Senate joining forces. And then we also have things like, there's proprietary networks. And even like Wi-Fi Halo is finally certified, although that feels like maybe not the best use case for something like a dog collar. So what about these other options that are available? What would you need to see from them to make them viable?
Yeah, I think you have like multiple categories of networks out there, right? Like you get the infrastructure type of networks that are kind of like the heavy CapEx, big infrastructure type of projects like cellular networks, right? Like you get like people coming out there and putting cell towers to relay signal across the country. Then you get the like more proprietary network. Sidewalks is probably part of them, right? I mean, I think the particularity about Sidewalks is that, for all these proprietary networks, the complexity is the same, right? Like how do you create an infrastructure out there where you have enough nodes that you can cover a very large area? Amazon is an interesting player in the space because they have all of these devices in people's home, right? But beside them, I think it's difficult to imagine any kind of private organization getting the necessary reach to be able to deploy this type of networks. These are all very interesting technologies, and I think we're trying to stay really on the bleeding edge of all of this and learn as much as possible as we see network like Helium or others develop, and we're trying to see what is a potential viable options and if they would perform better than what we have now, obviously.
Okay. Yeah. And I think the biggest reason why this would be an issue is because with cellular connectivity, you get a cellular cost, right? And so that means that you've got probably to charge a subscription to customers, which y'all do. So talk to me about why y'all went with the subscription, how you kind of determined pricing, all of those things.
Yeah, obviously the data in general is part of your cost stack, right? And so you need to be smart about the way you allocate the traffic of your customer and make sure you reduce this cost for you. I think your business model doesn't really have to map perfectly to how variable your costs are on the other side, right? Like you can kind of pick and choose what pricing model you want and what works the best with your customer. With ourselves, I've experimented with a lot of different structure there. And I think, in every pricing conversation, you get willingness to pay, cost structure, competitive pricing. There are a lot of ways to approach that problem. But when it comes to, I think in general, when it comes to the data cost around these different networks, whether they're proprietary or cellular or others, right? I don't think these create a substantial barrier to us being able to price for our customers. In general, so our product is priced at $149 for the color, which is the piece of hardware. And then we're charging $99 per year for the subscription to be able basically to not only activate cellular and GPS kind of location tracking, but also all kind of like the advanced features that we build over time in the product. For example, advanced sleep tracking, more networking options with other people through the Fi network, like so you can connect with other dog owners and things like that. And I think it's really how you should be thinking about your product. It's like it's an overall value proposition offering. And yeah, cellular data is part of the underlying stack of costs that you have to offset for. But it's not like we're trying to pass forward the cost of cellular into our customers.
Okay, that's a good point. And there's also, in addition to data, there's things like your cloud costs and software updates over time. I mean, all of that adds up. And we've seen tons of companies run into that problem of scaling just enough to get into trouble there. So when you were setting prices, what did you learn? Like help someone who's like, oh, I think a subscription is important. How do I make this work for me? How do I test things? Any advice for them?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pricing, there is only one successful strategy, and it's testing. I think everyone who has been on the whiteboard trying to predict demand and elasticity has been in a very bad spot, and especially willingness to pay around all the myriad of different models we have today, right? Like, yeah, I think it's like starting from, on our side at least, the way we approach it, we start from a hypothesis and we try to base that hypothesis on the market and what we know about it. And then we just test a lot. I think in the past year, we probably tested like 25 variations of our pricing in different ways, shape, or form. And we just continue kind of educating our learnings around this. And that allows us to strategize or roadmap forward when we come up with new features and options.
So when you say testing around pricing, are you testing like different monthly prices? Are you testing like, oh, let's do an annual price and 2 months free, or like how sophisticated do you get? Okay.
Literally extremely sophisticated. We tried everything from bundle pricing, including the color in a subscription with a service, to discounting the color heavily upfront, increasing the price of subscription, to discounting the subscription up front, to trial months, to deferring the cost of the subscription or the color. Like literally, we try to iterate on every single permutation possible, not only of the price point, but also of the pricing structure.
Would you ever do something like tiered pricing? Does that like with different features going for super premium versus premium? I feel like we're not that sophisticated yet in the IoT, but I feel like we could get there.
Well, I think there is definitely like a business case for it. The question is, do you have enough value to create at the top of your stack to have people progressively climb it, right? How would you feel if like AirPods will send you for $5 a month, you can hear in one AirPod, and for 10 you can hear in both? I think it's pretty much the situation in which like when we build out IoT products, most of the time there is one kind of feature or value proposition that is taking most of the value you're creating for the consumer. And the rest is really like kind of nice to have or good features to kind of like keep the consumer engaged. And, our product is no different, right? Like that's funny. You were mentioning the whistle earlier with the activity tracking and kind of smiled at it in the sense that it was not that useful. But something we realized in our business is that the real wedge in the space is definitely about the tracking. Like people buy our products for the peace of mind of being able to track their dog every day, anywhere, right? And for that one time when the dog is going to escape and you might save their life with this device, right? But what keeps them engaged every day is actually the type of like addictive behavior that we can create around sleep tracking, activity tracking, competition across the dogs, being able to compare your steps to other dogs in the network. Feature that by themselves would probably not sell the product. But once you have this on your dog and you start buying into it, and experiencing it, like there are tons of ways that we're going to engage you with the product that are way behind location tracking. Because when you think about it, location tracking, it's not something you're going to use every day, right? It's not something that's going to create value every day. So I think there is complementarity in these different features, and there are ways to definitely create like tier of subscription pricing. Just have to make sure you have enough in each bucket to actually make it valuable for the people.
Okay. And from a customer point of view, what percentage of your buyers return year after year or reactivate?
Yeah, so I mean, like without giving too many numbers here, I think it's very high. It's Netflix-like. We're pretty lucky that we're able to retain most of our user base year over year. And we measure that in like, there are different ways that we measure kind of like the engagement of our user base as well, right? Like for example, I mean, there is like on average, there is something like 1.2 dogs by dog owner or household in the US. So like a lot of our user base, we see them buy the device for their first dog, and when they like it, they just buy it for their other dogs. So we have a pretty substantial, repeat purchase of our users. Obviously, now we have like we launched the business in 2019, so we have like close to 3 years of cohorts that we can look at. We tried monthly plans on some users, so we even have these cohorts where we can see month over month how much they churn versus a yearly one. We also sell discounted 2 years and 3 years memberships. So you can like prepay for 2 years, prepay for 3 years. So now we can see these guys renewing as well. All that data looks very, very sticky. So we're pretty happy about where we stand right now.
That's great, because a lot of connected devices have like sub 30% subscription rates, which
becomes very difficult to sustain a business with that for sure.
Well, in the collar without a subscription, what does it offer people?
Without a subscription, you can basically track the activity of your dog without using using your phone to relay the data. So basically, the characteristic is that we're not powering the antenna on the collar to just acquire location through GPS or sending that data through cellular. But you're right that like on purpose, we made this functionality very limited, right? Like, and to be honest, like I think north of 93% of our collars sold attached to a subscription. So like pretty much everyone who buys this collar just buys it with a subscription for GPS and cellular tracking.
Nice. We also see with devices like this, technology devices, connected devices, that they last maybe, I don't know what the lifespan of a dog collar is. Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? I'm just security updates. How long do you support a collar?
That depends on the dog. I always say if you want to not start a hardware business, try a device that is small with lithium-ion battery, 4 different antennas, and try to make it live around the neck of the dog. That's fun.
I tried to stick a tile on my dog once, and she chewed it right off. I mean, she was really good at that. I was like, dang. So yeah, I feel you. But
no, it's brutal for sure. No, I think so. First, we're on a little bit further down than the second version of the collar. So every 18 months, we've been able to release a product, which means that we're rolling our past user base into the new version. A lot of them upgrade. So we're pretty lucky which makes sense because if they like the product and we see high retention on the subscription, when we come up with a new model, it makes sense that they roll into the new version of the collar. We give them a deal to like upgrade. And so we've been able to see our user base nicely rolling into the Series 2. And we're already working on the next version of the collar. So I'm pretty excited about releasing that and seeing the user base roll into that as well. But from, physical and mechanical property perspective, like there is nothing about the collar that we like say that doesn't explode after 3 years, right? Like what you're going to start seeing more frequent mechanical failures or like things around plastics or typical deformation of metal. But yeah, so far this hasn't been really a factor into what we're dealing with most of the time, and honestly, if someone has been with us for 2 or 3 years and their collar is starting to fail, we'll just replace it and make sure they continue with the service, because at that point, that's where we extract most of value.
Got it. And that makes sense. And that also solves kind of a problem that I think we see more and more companies getting into now that the IoT space has matured, which is they've got maybe 3 or 4 different versions of their hardware they're still trying to support. And that really quickly becomes untenable. So it sounds like do you have a formal plan for getting, I don't know how many years from now it would be to get your V1s out of the market?
Yeah, so we on purpose, we discontinue the V1 when we start shipping the V2, right? So we don't have them live in parallel on the sales side. So considering our growth profile, I would say that pretty fast, your new version is taking over the first version in your user base. And when you have problems on your previous version you cannot resolve, then it becomes easier to just incentivize the users to upgrade to your newer version than to try to fix the first one.
Sure. And yeah, it's more like when you've got, version 3 and 4 out there, and then you've still got version 1, you got that one guy who remembers how that was configured or something, you're like, Yeah,
but like, I guess my point is like, if you have that Series 1, that person has been with you for like 4 years, like gift him a collar, like offer him the free upgrade. This person has been paying you 4 years of subscription. If you didn't extract enough value out of that person in 4 years to pay for a free collar, the model is a problem,
Thank you for saying that. I am glad. Okay. And then what's next for y'all? Are y'all going to stick with the collar? I mean, collars are great. Tracking is great. Where else do you go?
Yeah, I think on the physical side, we definitely want to stick with the collar. I mean, we're nowhere close to what we want to achieve in the space. Series 3 is in the work. We're very, very excited about it. I think it's a giant leap forward from the 2 previous versions. The steps after that for me is not really to create some kind of like connected device ecosystem. The reason why we built this collar in the first place was that because we thought that if we were to crack the hard technical issues around connectivity, battery life, miniaturizations, and things like that, we had an opportunity to live 24/7 on like the 100 million dogs out there. And that from a data perspective is very, very strategic place to be at. So I don't have really any like big interest in trying to create more physical devices connecting to the dog ecosystem. What I'm really interested in is how do we use that data to create like additional value add for the dog owners, right? So like one thing we did this year is that we really released the first advanced sleep tracker for dogs. And that was never really built before. I mean, like there were things that people were claiming were like sleep tracking, but what they were really tracking is the dog not walking, right? We actually developed the right set of heuristics to be able to say your dog is napping now, it's during the day, and here's the beginning, here's the end of that nap. And yes, we know that his legs are moving during the sleep, but it's not him being awake, it's something different. We do things like detecting the beginning of the night of the dog, the end of the night, detecting what we call sleep interruptions, which is when your dog wakes up during the night during a small period of time, but he's like clearly awake. And that's very important because if you start correlating this type of data to health issues, then you can like start anticipating health issues progressing in the dog. These are things we can do now. So our goal is to continue making these devices smarter and smarter and really try to use trove of data that we're collecting to create kind of that next level of understanding of dogs. Like if you think about human and dogs, like our research and understanding of that whole space has been very, very limited. And I think with the technology that's available to us today, we can do something that's clearly magical. And so we're very excited about going in that direction.
Nice. And my dog sleeps with her eyes open, so she's extra creepy. I'm like, she never sleeps. It's scary as all get out. That would be useful. So I have to ask on behalf of all dog owners everywhere, is there anything in your collar that will keep my dog from jumping up on my white comforter and sleeping there when I leave the house?
Listen, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And I don't think we should, to be honest. Tess. I kind of like your dog jumping on your bed.
This is our drama is, man, I just need like a sprayable water bottle because I could see her on the camera. We talked to her. We're like, hey, get off the bed. And she's like looking at us like, what's happening?
I know. Right. I get the same. Listen, I have like 100 pounds German Shepherd. I guarantee you the waking up in my house is quite interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. I appreciate you coming on the show this week.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening and please subscribe.